Welcome to the Board Game Marketing Podcast. Let's cue the intro. This is the #1 podcast to learn marketing strategies for your board game. Whether you're just starting on your first game or an experienced designer, you've come to the right place. My name is Nalin, and let's talk marketing for your game. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. In this podcast, I interview creators who have successfully funded their ideas on Kickstarter to learn more about their journey to launch and help you formulate your own plan. I also bring on experts in the tabletop space to talk about all the facets of marketing and building your game publishing company. If you've been listening for a while now, you know that I hold nothing back. So in these episodes, be prepared to hear me ask the hard questions and really get down to the finer details. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Board Game Marketing Podcast. Today, we're super lucky to have Will Carson on the show, and I'm really excited for everything that he has to share with us today. Will, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Perfect. So I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into tabletop gaming.
It started with role-playing back in middle school and high school. And, as I got older and started hanging out with not only my friends but their parents, they introduced me to some early Euro games. And I think Tigris Euphrates was my first one I've ever played. And I just loved the way that, board gaming worked and the puzzles involved. And I've kind of been hooked for the last, 25 years. And so it went kind of from that to I had a friend who was was designing a game, and he never finished anything. And so I liked something he was working on. And so I told him if he finished it, I'd produce it. And really thinking he would have no follow through. And then he did. And so I had to start a game company. And, that's the quick origins of how my game company started.
Wow, that's incredible. Starting from a really young age, and now you're like really just full time into this. I would love to learn more about what you do now, because I think that's something that's going to be really of interest to everyone listening today.
Yeah. So after I designed and produced, I think it was about 5 games, that I realized that I had a garage full of games. And, I'd go to different stores and they keep asking me, do you have a distributor? And I'd be like, no. And so it was, some stores really like to help out indie, but a lot of stores just, either don't have an interest in it because they're there to sell the stuff that moves, or they just can't afford to take the risk. So at some point, someone asked me if I had a distributor, and I had enough products that I was like, yeah, I'm the distributor. And I just started, I teamed up with my friend Sathian, and between us, we just started tapping all of our resources and started bringing in indie developers. And, we're almost a year in with the distribution, and right now, I think we've got about 80 SKUs, and our whole goal in life now is to get indie games onto shelves of game stores.
Wow, that's incredible. So in this whole entire process, how can, indie game publishers work with you all, and how can they, find you? How can they work with you all? How can they make this process, helpful for you and for themselves too?
Yeah, we have the process that we use for it is, either a store will say, hey, we really want this game, go get it for us. So that's one way. But if the designer, producer, developer, whichever they happen to be, wants to take a more proactive approach, they can look us up on social media or on our website. It's Indipro Games, and it's INDIPRO, which means Independent Distribution Project. And so if people get a hold of us on there, give us a little, tell us about their game. We'll go look it up. We check it out on Board Game Geek and stuff like that. And, if we're interested in the game, we have them send us a demo and we play it. It's one of the things we do as a distributor is we've played every game we carry, and we curate our games. So if a game comes in that just really probably won't do well on a store shelf, we let the developer know, like, hey, like, you might have a good game, but you have no shelf presence. Or, other way around is you have amazing shelf presence, but my stores will get mad if I sell them this game. So I like to, I give that information, but a lot of times, indie developers are gamers, and the reason they're developing is because they've been playing games and they're like, oh, I want this, or I think this has been done wrong, or I have an idea. And so I love just the creativeness and ingenuity that comes with a lot of indie games. And so, like, I find that there's a lot of games that come out that are just good games that are never going to be given a chance. So, like, that's what we do, is we then take those games all excited and go into our stores and teach the stores about them, so that the stores can be like, oh, I like this game, and they can push it. Because if it's just sitting on their shelves and they don't know anything about it, that works for Wingspan and that works for Catan, but that does not work for, Argued, right? Like, these are just like games that everyone's heard of, like, they sell themselves. But so we try to push it a little harder.
Got it. So from a lot of our listeners, want to launch their game on Kickstarter, want to crowdfund for their games. When does this process to kind of think about distribution and about post-campaign kind of presence start, and how does that match up with kind of the marketing materials they need to have to start working with you?
Well, I mean, if I can get a hold of someone before they go into their Kickstarter, I'm usually a lot happier, because then I can tell them things like, your box is garbage. Like, it's like you have, so many people don't put the title of their games on their side facings. And, and then there's a lot of store shelves that, just don't get front facings. So, I like to be able to get with them early and talk about stuff like that. And then I also like to figure out, when you're going to Kickstarter, there's kind of two different mentalities. You can be making a boutique game, which is, I want to make this cool, ridiculous game. And, and it's going to be kind of expensive, and I'm going to push it on Kickstarter. And those are great, but know that that's what you're doing, because most of those games have no chance on a store shelf. There's price points that stores are willing to take a risk on, and there's a certain amount of hype that's needed. But, like, we carry a game right now that did $250,000 on their Kickstarter, but it's a $70 retail game. And, like, there are stores that really want it, but there's a lot of stores who are just like, I can't. But, they're working on a retail version right now that'll be targeting more of a $40 spot. And so that's the second type of game developer, the ones that are like, yeah, what I really care about is getting my game out there. I'm trying to make a long-term business of this. And so, those are the ones that I can help, because if we can get their game down to, something that the stores will invest in, then it'll have a much better chance of succeeding. And then as soon as I've signed a developer, I tell them, go ahead and put our logo and let your Kickstarter people know that you've got a distributor, and that having a distributor gives you, some more credibility and helps you succeed. And then if you can succeed, then I get more games to put in stores. So it's a win-win.
Perfect. I love that win-win that you just kind of talked us through just now. What you kind of touched on this already, but I wanted to really dive a little deeper into it. What do you look for when you look for games that are kind of ready or good for distribution?
So box and rulebook is a big one. Like, if I open up your rulebook and I can't play your game, that doesn't make me happy. I know that a lot more people are leaning towards doing videos for everything, and that helps. But I know that myself, and there's a lot of people who still want to open a game and look at the rule book and know how to play the game. And then there are a lot of people like Sathian who are just like, if I can help it, I never look at a rule book, so you better have a good video. So, like, between us, we try to make sure that both of those are covered. And then the gameplay, like if if I'm playing a game and it excites me, be it it's familiar enough, because that's a big thing for just people in general. They want to be familiar with things. If it's familiar enough but has a twist on it, then then I'm like, ooh, what is this new evolution in gaming? And I pay a lot of attention to the evolution of gaming, and or just something that is new. Like every once in a while I see a game that I'm just like, I never would have even thought to design this, let alone known to do it. So like I look for just basically things that are either really creative and intuitive, or things that are things that I already kind of understand the feel of, and but they've added something new to it, or it's got a theme that's really hot.
Got it. Okay, so box, rule book, and familiar with a twist. Those are really, really key points that you brought up there. Thank you for going through that. And when people are thinking about kind of printing their games and like quantities, what are we looking at when we're looking at distribution?
So I always tell people you really want to print at least 2,000 copies. That's where one of the good price breaks is. If you can get more than that, awesome. But most indie people just like, you can't really afford to go more than that. And then you've also got to do that balance of, if you buy 5,000 copies of your game and you do a Kickstarter, there's a good chance that you still have several thousand copies of your game in your garage, or taking up your spare room, or you're paying for storage. So, I like to just push 2,000, much less than that, and the price gets prohibitive, for selling. One of the big mistakes I see people do is they say, oh, I produced my game on Game Crafter, and that makes me cringe every time because I can't sell your game if you did that, because you will lose money. The big important thing is distributors are going to pay you 40% of MSRP. Which seems really low, but then they take a small cut, and then they give they sell it to the stores, and the stores pretty much have to double the price to cover their overhead and employees and rent and all that stuff. And if the game doesn't sell, then they've already sunk that in there. So you need to be able to make a profit at twice what you produced it for. So I always tell people, like, look at what your cost is to get it to your door, and at minimum of 5 times that is what you need to be charging for the game. So if you've made a game that, component wise comes out to, you can buy games similar for $30, then you need to have the game to your door for $6. And so, yeah, these are things that are important that people just don't know. And I watch, I've watched people say, oh, it took me $13 a unit, and this is a $35 game. And I'm like, it's actually a $25 game. And you've just shot yourself in the foot. Yeah. So you mentioned pricing quite a few times during our talk just now. Talk to me more about how you look at pricing for the different things. Are there different models you look at? Do you kind of have a spreadsheet of similar games? Like, can you kind of talk us through pricing? Yeah, like a lot of it, and I hate this because I prefer small box games. I want stuff to take up as little room on my shelf as possible. But like box size matters. Like if you've got your standard, like your standard square game box, that runs $40 to $45, like that has a lot of influence on it. But, if I open that game box and there's 2 decks of cards and a couple of dice, I as a consumer is going to feel cheated, and that's not going to help you. So like there's this balance between what you've got in the box and how big the box is. It's like we deal with a lot of like, double deck style card games that, it's like they really can't go more than $15 or $20. And it depends, depending on how your box is. A 2-part box always gets a little bit more, a little bump in price, because the 2-part box is more expensive to make than a tuck box when you're dealing with card games. And don't ever use a tuck box for bigger games. But Yeah, and so really when it comes down to like price is a lot of just kind of looking at shelves, and it's like if you've got a bunch of minis in it, like you can probably get up to 50, 60, really pushing it if you go 70, but I also don't really recommend people who are working on their first game put minis in their game, because you're paying a lot of money for your molds, and you have to split that up amongst every unit. So, it's like we had someone who was brought in a game and it had, I think, 8 different molds that it needed, and it was going to be something like $70, $80 game. And we asked them if they needed that. And they were like, I mean, I really like them. I was like, but could you do standees for all of your stuff? And they're like, I mean, we could. And I'm like, well, if you could do that, we can bring your game down to $35, $40 and stores will buy it. So like part of it is just what components are in it. If you've got a lot of plastic and dice, the price is going to be a little bit higher, and people are usually more okay with that. If it's pretty much just cards and a playing board, like you're gonna be limited more down in like the $30 range. And it's like different things, art quality, effects stuff, and then also just hype. Like a great example is Splendor is not a $50 game, but they sell it for that. And, because they've got a big company behind them, they've got quality components, and they've got amazing marketing. So like there's a lot of things that affect it, but so yeah.
That's a really great breakdown. Thank you for kind of going through all that and even giving that example too of like box versus what's inside the box and the pricing and the marketing behind it. So when it comes to a game that, is going to Kickstarter, and they're trying to figure out all this box size, all this pricing, and all that, what kind of marketing materials should they have in order to help, entice end retail stores to maybe have you request them to actually be distributed to them? Does that kind of make sense?
I think so. So one is getting in your demo copies early, and that is a thing where where Print and Play or Game Crafter can be very useful. Is you can they're more expensive per unit, but they're marketing costs, they're not production costs. So getting those out early and being able to show off a product. I know a lot of people can't do it. One of the things that I prefer to do is basically have the game done before I go to Kickstarter. My newer stuff, we already have it sent to the printer before we even go to the Kickstarter, which allows us to deliver quickly, but it also allows us to have, our demo copies and stuff usually mid Kickstarter or right towards the end of Kickstarter to send stuff off. So like those are things to take into account, but there's, most people who are running a Kickstarter because they need the funds. I personally, I like to use Kickstarter for more as an advertising thing. I've already, my last Kickstarter paid for this game, and I try to keep ahead on things that way.
That's a really good point to bring up, between using Kickstarter as a way to fund creating a game versus using Kickstarter as a way to find a kind of a bigger market or like advertise for your game. Can you talk about kind of your different approach to that? How did you decide one versus the other, and how are you marketing it in this way?
So, I mean, for me, my big thing is I get, it's just like that complaint of Kickstarter is like, oh, I backed a Kickstarter, and then when the game finally arrived, I forgot that I had even backed it, and I don't really like that. And then as far as dealing with stores, stores get the hype of a game while the hype is there. And if you're running a good Kickstarter, your hype is probably there right around your Kickstarter. And so if you have this hype and stores are like, oh, I'm interested in this game, and then the game hits the market a year later, they've already forgot about your game. There's just, too many games get released every year for a store to keep up on that. So if you are aiming for jumping into stores and riding that hype, it's like having it all ready and using that Kickstarter as, to really put a spotlight on you allows you to then say, go and, talk to your stores about this game and try to pay, try to get it, pick it up there. And, and then the Kickstarter ends, you get your last little bit of funding, and the game is already basically ready to ship out. So you can, if you've got someone like us who's, is a distributor, and you've been running a really good Kickstarter, like our stores will start saying, hey, keep an eye out. And we'll be like, oh, we've already got this one. Like they're actually going to release their game, 3 weeks after the Kickstarter's all done. So, do you want to get in on these orders? And you're just going to move more copies of it that way. But there's that upfront cost. And, so there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of things you have to take into account, and what can you afford to do versus what do you have even the inclination to do? Like some people really want to just run their Kickstarter, be like, oh, it succeeded or it didn't. And if it didn't succeed, then they're like, okay, cool, I'm not out anything but my time. But if it succeeds, then cool, I'm gonna play with this and take it to the next step. And none of those are wrong. It just really depends on what is your mentality, what are you trying to do business wise.
Yeah, so it seems like you have a lot of experience from all these different angles, being a Kickstarter creator yourself, having launched games yourself too, and now working at Indipro. Indipro. Sorry, my fault. Indipro. So from this, can you tell us more about what kind of services you offer? Because it seems like it's very holistic, what you're able to kind of help creators do.
Yeah, there is my little bit of free service is I am always willing to sit down with a designer and tell them just the little things that everyone screws up on that I would like no one to ever screw up on again. Things like having the title on the side of your box, having the different sides of your box have different facings of your title so your game can be displayed different ways. A lot of that present stuff. We also help get games to the printer. I have several years of experience with a couple of printers, and so I can leverage my experience with the printers and use my discounts to help other people get their games for cheaper. And that's going to help a lot, because if you're creating your first game, like, the printer knows that they're going to have to hold your hand. And if they're going to have to hold your hand, it's going to cost them more time and they're going to charge you more. And so they roll that into your quote, where if a printer is working with me, they already know that a lot of the basic pitfalls I've already got handled. So I get a discount for that. And, all of the publishers that have been around for a while end up with those kind of discounts as they've proved that they're not a pain in the ass to work with. So I do provide the printing quotes and print services. And sometimes I can knock the price down, 20-30%, which if you can take a game that you thought was going to be $50 and bring it down to $40, and that's that much less that the store has to invest in the game, which makes them more likely to pick it up. So that's one of my big ones. And then distribution is what we're all about. So that's once it's actually out, we will take it and we'll put it in stores. And we deal with stores in a number of different ways. We have a handful of stores that take our games on consignment. And this is great for those games that just, they look interesting, but people are not really sure they want to invest in it. So getting it into a store and on a shelf without that extra cost is good for everybody. And then when it sells, we're like, okay, cool. Now it gets paid for. And then most of our stores, though, they go wholesale because they would like the deeper discounts. And, if they're buying a game, it's because they have some sort of faith in the game. So those are our two big ones. And then I also tell people, it's like, if you come to me with a game and you say, hey, I'm looking to get a print quote for this. And I'm like, all right, I've got this going on. But I need you to sign an NDA. And I will tell them, no. If you're bringing it to me, you should already be hyping the hell out of your game. And so if you need me to sign an NDA, it's because your game is not in the point where it's ready to be produced, or you're just kind of stuck in this, in this mindset that, it's like that a lot of business has taught us over the years is everything is secretive. Don't steal my stuff. But producing a board game is a fair amount of work for not as much money as people would hope. So like, for the most part, like people aren't going to steal your stuff, especially if it's at this point and you're already talking about it.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the NDA thing and just how people should be hyping up and talking about their games now at this point. They're reaching out to you. That's super important, I think. And you talked about, the manufacturing part, the printing part, and also the distribution part. How long does it take for, as a new creator, how long does it take for this whole distribution thing to happen? What are reorders like? Are there a lot of reorders? What should they do to prepare for this whole process?
So that's going to entirely depend on your own marketing and, just the reception of the game to the public as a whole. But if you go on to Kickstarter and, you just kind of ho-hum through it and you succeed and you get it printed and you send it out into stores, like what a distributor isn't is, they're not marketing. Like what they are is they are a way for people to get the game. A lot of stores, they have their handful of distributors they work with. And if they were to work with every individual person, the amount of paperwork would just be ridiculous. So they want stuff consolidated through a distributor, which is, what we do is we bring indie games to that point. But if you're not talking about your game and you don't have other people talking about your game, it's going to sit in my warehouse and it's not going to move more than, it's like when I walk into a store, I'm like, hey, we really like this game, but that doesn't, that works for my local stuff because, we throw out, email stuff to the stores and whatnot, but to be fair, that doesn't get looked at nearly as much as anyone would want it to because they're getting emails, almost every day from distributors with lists and lists of things. So, it's like most stores are going to order stuff because their customers are asking about it. So like if you want your game to be moving, you also have to put forth the time, effort, and or money to market the hell out of it. One of the things we do specialize in is games that have either already lived their life with a bigger distributor and have just gotten lost in the catalog, or, where people are trying to get through a print run, smaller amounts. If someone sends us a couple hundred copies of their game, we can get out there, we're pushing that and give it a second little life to finish that off. But when it's a new game, you just you have to put your money where your mouth is and you have to be out there pushing it and using all these, different marketing people or just really leveraging your own social media.
Got it. Yeah. I love all these kind of industry knowledge and the little tips that you've been kind of sprinkling throughout the entire kind of conversation here. And if people want to work with you and want to reach out, get in touch and just, want to sign up, where should they go? So on social media, Facebook and whatnot, is Indipro Games and INDIPRO Games. And our website is indiprogames.com, and you can contact us through that. And yeah, if you've got a game that's either already out or you're getting ready to go into your Kickstarter phase or even already in the Kickstarter phase, get a hold of us and we'll see how we can help. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Will. This was really, really enlightening. Thank you. And that wraps up our episode today. If you found what we talked about today helpful in any way, please be sure to leave a review to help others find this podcast. And most importantly, if you're feeling that fire and you're ready to get started on your Kickstarter campaign, be sure to head to the show notes of the podcast. I've linked some of my resources that others have used to successfully launch and get funded. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. For daily tips and advice, find us in the Board Game Marketing group on Facebook. See you next week.